at Otterbein University, where I'll be teaching some classes today, or let's say talking with students. We're at OTV, which is Otterbein Television. And Harvey Wasserman, I wanted to talk to you now about voting machines and your concern over the years that electronic voting could be used to steal elections. Are you still concerned about this?
Well, electronic voting was used to steal the presidential election right here in Ohio in 2004. John Kerry was the rightful winner in 2004 over George W. Bush. The Secretary of State at the time, J. Kenneth Blackwell, and the Governor, Robert Taft, used their power of electronic vote count to flip the vote to George W. Bush from John Kerry. We watched it. I grew up here, Amy. We watched it totally right up close and personal. We did the accounting. I work with a political scientist named Bob Fitrakis. We're about to come out with another book, The Strip and Flip of the 2016 Selection. They are stripping the voter rolls, and Greg Palast, the great investigative reporter, is doing great work on this, removing African Americans, Hispanics, people who might incline to vote progressive, and in 2004 they stripped 300,000 people from the voter rolls here in the urban areas. Bush only won by less than 120. In this year, about 80% of the vote nationally will be cast on electronic voting machines. There is no verifiability. In 6 key swing states, Florida, North Carolina, Ohio, Michigan, Iowa, and Arizona, you have Republican governors and Republican secretaries of state, and no method of verifying the electronic vote count. At midnight or whenever it is on election night, those two guys can go in there with an IT person and flip the outcome of an electronically counted vote within about 60 seconds. So all this millions and millions of dollars, people out campaigning and so on, can be negated by an electronic vote flip late at night on election night, and there is no way to verify what's happened.
They didn't do this with President Obama in 2008.
They did. He had too many votes. He was too far out. They couldn't. It would have taken them too many to flip too many states. I believe Obama won by well over 10 million votes. The final vote count was official was in 7 or 8.
But what gives you this idea?
Because we've seen it happen. When you compare exit polls, which are generally accurate to within 1%, with the electronic outcome, there are huge variations, and we have documented many dozens of different things that they have done over the years to flip electronic
How does
votes.
e-voting, electronic voting, work, and who controls the controls on it?
Well, that's the key. The electronic voting machines are owned by private corporations, which are Republican in orientation generally, and the courts have ruled that the source code on these electronic voting machines is proprietary. So even the governments that buy or lease these machines have no access to a final verification process. Even Ronald Reagan said, trust but verify. And we know that the vote count was flipped in 2004. We know it was flipped in Volusia County in 2000.
Where is Volusia County?
In Florida, when Al Gore basically was the rightful winner and George W. Bush won the election. I mean, the only
And they were electronic voting machines?
In Volusia County, they were, yes. In the southern part of Florida, they used butterfly ballots, as you'll recall. The only good thing we can say about George W. Bush is that the American people never actually elected him president. And we're looking now at 2016, an election where we very easily flipped in those 6 key swing states and elsewhere.
What do you think is the answer?
We have to have universal hand-counted paper ballots, and Bernie Sanders has endorsed that. We have to have automatic voter registration where people can monitor the registration rolls, because people are being stripped from the registration rolls, mostly, of course, African-American and Hispanic. But this year, we're not going to get that, and this year is going to be very, very difficult in a close election to monitor exactly what happens, because these are black boxes. We have a wonderful activist named Bev Harris, who's been working with Greg Palast and others, who has shown in black box voting that the public has no real access, no verification process for the electronic votes. And so we're going through this huge charade here of a national campaign, primaries, and then a general election where hundreds of millions of dollars will be spent. And on election night, in 60 seconds, the actual outcome can be flipped electronically in key swing states with no verification whatsoever.
If there are electronic voting machines everywhere, which there are now,
Pretty much, yes.
How do you think they can be protected? People can be sure that their vote is counted, that they cast, even using electronic voting machines?
They can't be. You cannot verify an electronic voting machine. They are privately owned by private corporations, and the proprietary software prevents the public from giving access to the actual vote count. We're going into a national election, and not just the presidency, but Senate seats, House seats. We believe 3 Senate seats in 2014 were stolen in North Carolina, Colorado, and Alaska, that the Republicans do not have a legitimate 54th seat or whatever it is majority in the Senate. And this will happen again. It's not just the presidency. And we've been we have written 7 books about this, Bob Fitrakis and I, from our experience here in Ohio in 2004. And again, we have a Republican governor, a Republican Secretary of State, no verifiability on the electronic vote count. It will be arbitrary when push comes to shove on midnight, 1 o'clock on election night, what the outcome will be.
Why do you think just Republicans would do it?
Oh, no, Democrats would definitely do it. We have strong questions about Rahm Emanuel being reelected in Chicago, for example. We have no doubt that Scott Walker stole his reelection in Wisconsin.
Based on what?
Based on the miraculous discovery of several thousand votes in a so-called glitched computer voting machine that gave him a victory where it was clearly a defeat. You know, this is stuff that was going on a long time. These methods were perfected more or less overseas by the CIA and other covert and overt operations. They came back. It started in 1988 with George H.W. Bush using electronic voting machines in New Hampshire to beat Bob Dole in the 1988 primary. And we have seen since then the use of electronic voting machines all across the country to flip elections after they have stripped the voter rolls. And
when you say stripping the voter rolls, you mean?
Yes. Well, Greg Palast has reported on this. In Florida, 2000, 90,000 mostly black and Hispanic voters were stripped out of the voter rolls before the election in a vote count that was won by 600 votes. And in Ohio, 2004, 300,000 voters in primarily urban areas were stripped off the voter rolls. People showed up to vote in the same precinct, as did I, by the way. I was denied my absentee ballot, and we had a federal lawsuit on this, which we won and went nowhere after that. But the reality is that we are voting in black boxes, and that the governors and secretaries of state of these key swing states, but wherever you have a governor and secretary of state from the same party, be they Democrat or Republican, they have the power under the electronic voting system to flip the outcome of an election with no verifiability, because the courts have ruled that these privately owned voting machines have proprietary software. It's a nightmare. And it's not democracy. I mean, Bernie Sanders has showed that the election, that the campaign finance is rigged, that the economy is rigged. Why wouldn't they take the very small next step to rig the electronic voting machines? Well,
we're going to leave it there for right now. Harvey Wasserman, independent journalist, longtime anti-nuclear activist. His recent article for the worldbeyondwar.org is Why the Deafening Silence on Cutting the Military Budget. His upcoming book is called The Strip and Flip Selection of 2016, 5 Jim Crows and Electronic Election Theft.